The last night on Archie Place, on the cold evening of December 3rd, 1957, in Sycamore, Illinois, 7-year-old Maria Ridulph left her home on Archie Place after dinner to meet her friend, 80-year-old Kathy Sycamore. The two girls had spent the earlier part of the day at West Elementary School, then cutting paper snowflakes at Maria's home. It was during this playful routine that a young man approached. He wore a dark overcoat and had blonde hair slicked back in a ducktail style. Introducing himself as Johnny, he said he was 24 and unmarried. He asked the girls if they liked dollies and offered piggyback rides. Maria laughed and climbed onto his shoulders as he trotted with her down the sidewalk. As night fell and the first flurries of winter began to swirl, Maria's parents allowed her to go back outside. Kathy, feeling the chill, went home briefly to get her mittens. She asked Maria to come, but Maria declined. Kathy, still wearing warm jeans, fresh from her family's clothes dryer, joined her mid-block, and they ran to a large elm tree on the corner. The doll Maria had carried, the only tangible evidence of her presence, would later be found discarded near a garage. What had started as a typical evening of childhood play had turned into the last moment Maria Ridulph would ever be seen alive by a friend. The girls played a game called Duck the Cars, darting between the tree and a nearby street pole to avoid headlights. She then ran home to fetch a doll. Her mother suggested an older rubber doll instead of her favorite. Maria rejoined Kathy and Johnny outside moments later. When Kathy returned just minutes later, both Maria and the man were gone. The corner where the girls had played was now empty. The panic set after returning to the empty street corner. Kathy Sycamore ran up and down Archie Place, calling Maria's name in growing panic. Light snow continued to fall. She rushed to the riddled side door, where Maria's older brother Chuck was inside listening to records with a friend. "Maria's lost," she said. "I can't find Maria." Chuck and his friend Randy began searching the neighborhood immediately. They walked down Archie Place toward the school but saw no sign of Maria or the stranger. As they returned home, Kathy was already speaking with her mother, who was now on the phone with Maria's mother, Frances. At first, Maria's father hesitated to involve police, recalling a prior incident when Maria had wandered off to a cemetery and returned on her own. But Frances, increasingly concerned, decided to act. At 8:10 p.m., she drove to the Sycamore Police Department to file a missing person report. Neighbors mobilized quickly, flashlights were distributed, and groups began canvassing the area. Doors that were rarely locked in Sycamore were now. A heavy mood settled over the small community, as fear replaced the town's usual sense of trust. Chuck joined a group of searchers who circled the block and eventually walked behind the Ridulph's home, through an alley. Near a garage, on Center Cross Street, someone spotted a doll lying in the snow. It was the same rubber doll Maria had carried when she disappeared. The discovery confirmed what everyone now feared. Maria had not simply wandered off. National outcry, and the FBI mobilizes the disappearance of Maria quickly escalated from a local emergency to a national story. Sycamore, a town of just 7,000 people, was overwhelmed by the attention. Reporters from Chicago, New York, and even national television networks arrived. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover demanded daily updates. President Dwight D. Eisenhower followed the case closely. The Riddle family's living room became a command center. FBI agents moved in. Neighbors, church groups, and civic clubs coordinated searches. Military planes circled overhead. Horseback riders and crop dusters joined the effort. Every vehicle entering or leaving town was stopped and searched. Motel rooms, train cars, and basements were inspected. Maria's parents made heartfelt public appeals. Her mother, Frances, pleaded through newspapers and television for her daughter's safe return. Her father, Michael, refused to believe she was dead. Kathy Sycamore, now under 24-hour police protection, was repeatedly questioned. She reviewed mugshots and attended multiple police lineups, though none matched the man she remembered as Johnny. Suspects emerged, including a local peeping Tom and men known by nicknames like Commando and Mr. X. Tips poured in from all over Illinois. A lake was drained. A quarry was blasted with dynamite in hopes of uncovering clues. Despite the manpower and urgency, the investigation produced no definitive leads. Maria's doll and belongings were sent to FBI labs, but yielded nothing conclusive. With no ransom demand and no communication from the abductor, the case began to stall. As days turned into weeks, the initial momentum faded. Despite intense national focus, Maria Ridulph remained missing and fear settled deep into Sycamore. Discovery in the woods on April 26, 1958, nearly 5 months after Maria Ridulph finished her. Man named Frank Sitar was foraging for morel mushrooms near the Iowa border when he noticed what looked like animal remains beneath a fallen tree. As he approached, he realized they were human bones. The discovery was made on a remote farm off US 20 near Woodbine, over 120 miles from Sycamore. Sitar notified authorities, and the Josephine County coroner, James Furlong, responded to the scene. Only partial remains were recovered. Birds and animals had scattered much of the body. Maria's checked flannel shirt, brown socks, and undershirt were still present, but no pants or shoes were found. There were no crime scene photographs taken. The coroner, inexperienced, and only 28, said he wanted to avoid sensationalism. Identification was made using dental records and Maria's clothing. Her mother recognized the socks and a patch she had sewn onto the shirt. Although the exact cause of death could not be determined, authorities labeled it a homicide based on the condition and location of the remains. Maria was laid to rest in a small white casket. More than 300 mourners filled the Evangelical Lutheran Church of St. John. Jesus Loves Me was played as friends and family said goodbye. Kathy Sigmund attended under police protection. Though Maria's body had been found, the discovery brought little closure. There were still no suspects, no motive, and no resolution. The identity of Johnny remained a mystery. The search for answers continued, but the case was now growing cold. Cold case realities in the decades following Maria Ridulph's funeral. The case remained unresolved. No arrests were made, and leads faded. Kathy Sigmund, the last person to see Maria alive, carried the trauma for years. Known as the girl who was with Maria, she felt isolated and burdened by survivor's guilt. Her family eventually left Archie Place, but the stigma followed her. In the early 2000s, a significant development revived the investigation. On her deathbed, Eileen Tessier reportedly made a disturbing statement implicating her son, John. According to 2 of her daughters, Eileen had said John was responsible for Maria's disappearance. Although the sisters disagreed on the exact wording, the confession prompted investigators to re-examine the case. John Tessier, Eileen's son from a previous marriage, had been questioned in 1957 but cleared based on a collect call he allegedly made from Rockford at the time. Maria vanished. However, inconsistencies emerged. Eileen had initially told police her son was home all night, contradicting the alibi. The old phone records that once protected him were now scrutinized. Tessier's half-sisters revealed long-standing resentment and fear toward their brother. One recalled how their mother always protected John, even after serious behavioral issues, including expulsion from school. The family dynamic added complexity to the revived case. Investigators began reconstructing timelines, searching for inconsistencies, and seeking any trace of corroborating evidence. Though more than 40 years had passed, the cold case was officially reopened. the focus shifted to building a circumstantial case that could survive legal scrutiny, one based on memory, suspicion, and fragments from the past. Investigation reopened. When authorities reopened Maria Ridulph's case, they faced significant challenges. The original physical evidence, including Maria's doll, which her abductor had touched, had been lost or destroyed. Without forensic evidence or a confession, investigators relied on decades-old documents and recollections. The case would hinge on circumstantial elements, timelines, witness memories, and testimony from According to the Innocence Project, such evidence has played a role in over half of the state's overturned convictions. Yet, in this case, prosecutors pressed forward, confident in the narrative being built. Key among these was Kathy Sigmund. Now, in her 60s, she had never forgotten the man she met that snowy evening. Shown a photo lineup more than 50 years later, she identified John Tessier, now living under the name Jack McCullough, the man who called himself Johnny. Prosecutors viewed her identification as crucial. Despite the time lapse and potential for memory distortion, investigators also turned to jailhouse informants. 3 inmates who were housed with McCullough claimed he had confessed to killing Maria. Their stories, however, varied. One said McCullough dropped Maria on her head. Another said he strangled her to silence her screams. A third claimed she was suffocated. The inconsistencies raised concerns about credibility. Illinois has a history of wrongful convictions stemming from faulty eyewitness identification and unreliable jailhouse testimony. Despite no physical evidence, they believed they had enough to move toward arrest and, finally, toward justice. McCullough's original alibi. He was in Rockford. Enlisting in the Air Force was revisited. Investigators questioned the timing of the call made from Rockford and examined its origin. Though the call had once cleared him, now it was seen as potentially fabricated. With renewed determination, authorities compiled what little they had into a prosecutable case. Trial and conviction in 2012. More than 5 decades after Maria Ridulph's disappearance, John Tessier, then known legally as Jack McCullough, stood trial for her kidnapping and murder. The defense opted for a bench trial, placing the decision solely in the hands of Judge James. There was no jury, with no physical evidence, no DNA, and no direct confession. The prosecution relied almost entirely on witness testimony and circumstantial evidence. Central to the case was Kathy Sigmund's photo lineup identification. Despite the passage of time, she insisted that McCullough was Johnny, the man who had approached Maria on the night of December 3, 1957. The prosecution also presented testimony from jailhouse informants, who claimed McCullough had admitted to killing Maria. Each account differed in detail, but together they formed the backbone of the state's narrative. The defense challenged the reliability of this evidence, citing the risks of memory distortion, flawed eyewitness procedures, and the motivations of incarcerated witnesses. They also attempted to introduce an old FBI report that supported McCullough's original alibi, but it was excluded as hearsay. Meanwhile, the prosecution was permitted to use Eileen Tessier's alleged deathbed statement implicating her son. The court deemed it admissible under hearsay exceptions, a controversial decision that drew criticism from legal observers. After 4 days of testimony, Judge Halak ruled that McCullough was guilty. His decision rested on the credibility of the eyewitness and the jailhouse informants. McCullough was sentenced to life in prison. For many in Sycamore, it was the closure they had awaited for 55 years. The community embraced the verdict as long-delayed justice for Maria. But questions lingered about the evidence, the fairness of the trial, and whether the conviction truly reflected the truth behind the coldest case to reach an American courtroom. Unanswered questions and legacy though, John Tessier, now Jack McCullough, was convicted and sentenced. Doubts surrounding the case never fully disappeared. Legal experts, journalists, and some community members raised concerns about the trial's fairness and the strength of the evidence presented. Much of the prosecution's case rested on decades-old memories, disputed hearsay, and testimony from jailhouse informants with questionable motives. The court permitted Eileen Tessier's alleged deathbed accusation against her son, despite conflicting accounts of what she said. At the same time, exculpatory evidence in FBI reports suggesting McCullough was in Rockford at the time of the abduction was excluded as hearsay. This imbalance led some to argue the courtroom reconstruction of history had been one-sided. Eyewitness identification, a critical pillar of the case, was based on a brief childhood encounter, remembered more than 50 years later. Critics questioned whether Kathy's identification could have been unintentionally influenced by investigators or the lineup format. The inconsistencies among jailhouse informant testimonies added to the skepticism. For Kathy Sigmund, now an adult with children of her own, the emotional weight of Maria's abduction never lifted. She continued to carry the trauma, along with public scrutiny. Though she believed justice had been served, others saw a system reaching for closure rather than truth. Maria Ridulph's case remains a haunting example of the complexities of cold case justice, how time can obscure facts, distort memories, and challenge the legal system's ability to deliver certainty. Even with a conviction, the question lingers: was the right man truly held accountable?